Nakia Youngell, and this is going to be my first video intro into pattern making, and we will be drafting a very basic skirt block. So we will draft half of the front and half of the back of a skirt, which will serve as the basis or the fundamental building block for any future intricate skirt designs. With this block, if I were to add seam allowance and sew it up, it would basically give us a very simple skirt. So that is what we are going to be getting into today. We'll go over the different tools you'll need, how to take your body measurements, and how to draft your skirt block. All right, so the first thing you want to do is gather all of your necessary materials for drafting your skirt block. It's kind of like a mise en place. It's the term that they use in cooking, but basically gather all your materials and put them in their appropriate space. So of course you're going to want to have your pattern paper or you can actually order pattern paper from Amazon, or you can get it from like a craft store like Plaza. I usually order mine on Amazon, but you can order any type of blank paper that's going to be large enough for you to draft on. You're going to want a ruler. I swear by these clear rulers. I've been using them since undergrad. They are, in my opinion, the best type of ruler to use for pattern making and drafting. You can get these at your local Joann's or Michael's or Hobby Lobby. You're going to want a hip curve ruler. It's not a necessity if you're just starting out, but it is a good investment ruler to have if you're going to continue and stick with pattern making. You're going to want a nice sharp pencil with a great eraser. Pencils are the best tool to be using when you are drafting. For the sake of this video, I will be using a thin point like marker, just so that the lines that I'm drawing show up a little bit clearer in this video, but typically I would not draft in a pen ever. You're going to want to have a measuring tape to measure, take your body measurements before you start, and then some paper scissors. So these are the basic tools that you'll need to draft your basic skirt block. So I tried to record myself drawing my drafting rectangle, but the volume, it was just really wonky, and so I was recording and I drafted it, and then I went and played it back, and it was horrible. So now I'm re-recording it. So a couple of things that I want to recap from my original video. Linked to this video, I will have instructions that I wrote, a step-by-step guide of everything that we're going to do in this video today, of how to draft your skirt block. And there is a place for you to record your body measurements right at the top. However, whenever I'm drafting, I love to record my body measurements somewhere on my drafting sheet so that it's readily available and I can easily just look and see and pull that measurement when needed. Again, this will be linked to the video that you can download and use when you are drafting your own skirt blocks. I have all of my tools to the side. And our first step is going to be to draft that drafting rectangle, so to speak. So the two measurements that we need for that are going to be your skirt length measurement, and then you're going to need half of your hip circumference measurement. And just to back up a little bit, the four measurements that we do need for drafting your skirt, your basic skirt block, are your waist circumference measurement, which is a horizontal measurement. It goes around the fullness of your waist. Your hip circumference measurement, which is again a horizontal measurement. It goes around the fullest part of your hip area. Your hip depth amount, which is typically measured on the side, is from your waistline point to where the widest part of your hip typically hits on your body. And then your skirt length measurement, which is a vertical. So the hip depth as well as the skirt length measurement are both vertical measurements. The skirt length measurement is going to be from your waistline to where you want your skirt to end, basically. For me, that's about 17 inches. I measured from my waist to my knee, which is typically what you would do for drafting the skirt block. You can always lengthen or shorten your skirt once you have that basic block. So you want to keep the length relatively like standard. So in order to draft my rectangle, which is where I will have my half of my front block and half of my back skirt block, I will use the skirt length measurement. For me, that was 17 inches. And that will be the length of my rectangle, and then half of my hip circumference measurement. So my hip circumference measurement was actually 37 inches. However, I added 2 inches of ease to that, and my waist circumference, just so you know, I added about 1/2 inch of ease to that. Those are just kind of like standard ease amounts that you will want to add to those horizontal measurements. Again, all of this is documented on the instructions that are available and linked in this video. So half of my hip circumference measurement was 19.5. So the width of my drafting rectangle is 19.5 inches. And of course, this is 17, this is 19.5, and that creates your drafting square. I'm going to try to follow along with the instructions that I have written that are downloadable on this video when drafting my skirt blocks. So I'm going to do a little bit of labeling here of our rectangle points. The top right hand corner of our rectangle is going to be point A. The bottom corner is going to be point B. The bottom left hand corner will be labeled point C, and the top left hand corner will be labeled D. Now the next step is that we're going to want to find the midpoints or the midpoint of line DA, and you can easily just take the half of your hip circumference measurement and divide that again in half. So for me, half of my hip circumference measurement was 19.5. Divide that in half, and I'm going to get 9.75 or 9 3/4, and I'm going to measure along line DA or AD, however you want to read it, until I get to 9 3/4, which is right here. And I'm going to label this point E. And then I'm going to do the same thing along the line C or CB or BC. I'm going to get that 9 3/4, and I'm going to label this point here F. And then we're just going to draw this straight line down. So we'll draw that straight line. All right, so now we have line CD. I'm going to label CB for center back. So this will be our center back seam line, or our center back line. And then from point AB or line AB, I'm going to write CF, writing this way, for center, oh, you guys, don't judge me, center, this is horrible, front. Have you ever tried writing sideways? It's interesting. I got it afterwards. Okay, so we have center front and we have center back. Now we're going to use our skirt, our hip depth measurement, which is usually, or the standard hip depth measurement is around 7 inches anyway. That is actually what my hip depth measurement was as well. And I'm going to measure down along points AB first, or line AB first, till I get to that 7 inches. I'm going to mark this point G, and I'm going to repeat this process along line CD, measuring down from point D. So the top of our rectangle till we get to 7 inches on the ruler. Label this point H. And then we're going to draw a horizontal line. So we are essentially creating the quadrants, if you will. I guess the technical term is quadrants. Let me make sure this line is straight. So mine is looking a little. This is why you always draft in a pencil. You just want to make sure your measurements are correct. Okay, yeah, so it's a little wonkiness happening with this line. I don't think I lined it up quite right, but we want our line to be as straight as possible, like so. I'm gonna darken this line over here. Oof. Nobody saw that. Okay, so this here, we're going to label your hip line. So now we have center back, center front, and our hip line. This half of the sheet is where we are going to be drafting your front half of your front sloper for your front block for your skirt. And on this half of the sheet, or this half of the rectangle, is where we will be draping the back half of, or half of the back half of your block. Right, so now that we have our drafting rectangle completely laid out, we're going to start move on to the next part, which is calculating for our darts. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is to calculate the difference between our waist circumference measurement and our hip circumference measurement. So for me, my waist circumference measurement again was 31.5, and my hip circumference measurement was 39. So the difference between those two is 7.5 inches. Typically speaking, if the difference between your waist and your hip measurements is greater than 10, you're going to want to draft 2 darts on the back and the front. If it is less than 10, you should be good with drafting just 1 dart on the back and the front. Now, for the sake of demonstration in this video, I'm going to show how to draft 2 darts. The instructions that are linked in the video show how to draft just 1 dart, and the process is the same essentially. With the instructions, you will follow them verbatim. I'm going to deviate just a little bit in this demonstration because I will be drafting 2 darts on the back and 2 darts on the front. So to calculate your dart, typically if you're doing a single dart on the front and the back, you are going to start with your back dart. You're going to, we're going to do a little bit of math. So you're going to need to take half of your hip circumference measurement, and you're going to subtract half of your waist circumference measurement. Now for me, half of my hip circumference measurement is 19.5, and half of my waist circumference measurement is 15.75 or 15 3/4. So I have 19.5 minus 15.75, and that gives me 3.75. So 3 inches and 3 3/4 of an inch is basically what we're going to be taking out in terms of fullness between the darts and the side seam. And I will demonstrate how to do that. So that's the first step. Now, using this number here, 3.75, I'm going to subtract the back dart intake amount. Now, the standard back dart intake amount is between 1 inch to 1 1/4 inch. And for me, I like to do about 1 1/4. So I would be subtracting 1 1/4 from this amount if I were just doing a single dart, right? That would be my dart intake amount, 1 1/4. Now, because I'm going to be drafting 2 darts, I'm going to do a little bit further math. So I have, we'll do that first. So 3.75 minus the 1.25 dart intake amount. So that's our dart intake, is going to give us 2.5. So 2.5 inches. Now, for me, I am going to divide, because I'm doing 2 darts on the back, I'm going to divide this dart intake amount of 1.25 in half. And that is going to give me 0.625, which is essentially 5/8 of an inch. So my 2 darts are going to have a dart intake amount of 5/8 of an inch. If I were doing 1 dart, it would be 1.2, 1.25 dart intake amount, but because I am doing 2 darts in the back, I am dividing this amount in 2 and distributing that amount between 2 darts. All right, so now using the result that we have here, which is that 2.5. So we subtracted the back dart intake amount from our 3.75, we got 2.5. Now using this amount here, we're going to subtract the front dart intake amount. So typically the front dart is a little bit less. The dart intake amount for the front dart is a little bit less than the back. So you can go anywhere from 1/2 inch dart intake amount to an inch. And I am going to be doing an inch. So I would take an inch, which is that total dart intake amount for the front, out of this. So 2.5 minus 1 inch. And that's going to give me 1.5. Now, again, because I'm doing 2 darts in the front and 2 darts in the back, my dart intake amount, which is 1, I would be dividing in half. So of course, 1 divided by 2 is going to give me 0.5 or half, okay? Or 1/2 inch. So now the 2 darts that I have in the front will be, the dart intake amount will be 1/2 inch. Our back dart intake amount for, if I'm using my measurements in drafting, 2 darts is going to be 5/8, and our front dart intake amount is going to be 1/2. Now, what we have left over, so we still have 1.5, so 1.5 inches left over from this amount here. That is going to be the side, that is going to be taken out to on the side seams. So I will divide this number in half. So 1.5 divided by 2 gives us 0.75 or 3/4. And that is how much we will be taking from the side seam. So a little bit of math, looks a little crazy. We're gonna show you how it all plays out with the drafting of the darts. Okay, so now using these measurements or these numbers that we calculated for dart placement, we're going to measure to the left and to the right of E, which is, E is essentially plotting our side seam. So center front, side seam, center back. Now, what we took from the side seam is 3/4 inch. So I'm going to go over to the left of E, 3/4 inch. And I'm going to mark a little notch. I'm going to label that I. And then I'm also going to go over to the right of point E, 3/4 inch. I'm going to write J. So those 2 points notate where the side seam for the front and the back skirt are going to be. Now, we're going to find the middle point between point D and I, and we're going to mark a notch. You can use your ruler, but I like to use my measuring tape. It's about 9 inches. And I just take my measuring tape and fold that over to where it lands, and then you get that midpoint here. And then I mark it like so. I'm going to label that point K. And then we'll do the same on the front. So we'll measure from A to J. So from center front to the side seam point should be about the same. I'm gonna bring that over to 9. And I'm gonna label that L. Okay, so we have our side seam, and then we have our dart our initial dart placement. Now, normally if I were just plotting one dart, I would divide my dart intake amount for the back dart, and I would measure over that half amount to the left and to the right to create those 2 dart leg points. However, since I'm doing 2 darts, we're gonna do things a little bit differently. So the distance between 2 darts for the back, if I'm drafting 2 darts on the back, is going to be about 1.5 inches. So for us, instead, for point K, I'm going to do 3/4 of an inch to the left. So I'm going to line my ruler up with 3/4 of an inch right at K. I'm going to go over and make a notch here, and then I'm going to go over 3/4 of an inch. And then let's see here. So 3/4 of an inch, and then measure 3/4 of an inch to the right and mark a point here too. So now this becomes one of my dart legs, and this should be one of the dart legs for the second dart. So now I calculated for my back dart, my back 2 darts, that the dart intake amount was going to be 5/8 of an inch. So I'm going to measure over 5/8 of an inch from this first dart leg, and I'm going to mark a notch, and then I'm going to do the same here. So from this point, which would be the first dart leg, I'm going to go over 5/8 of an inch, and I'm going to mark a point. So now I have my 2 dart legs mapped out there. All right, so for my back darts, I want to find the midpoint between the 2 original notches, which I did here, and I notated that midpoint, and the same for that second dart. Now, at those midpoints, extending down from line AD or DA, however you want to read it, down to line GH, I'm going to make a dashed line. Just gonna do a little dashed midpoint guideline. And this is going to help us to mark our dart tip or dart point, which for back darts, which are a little bit deeper than front darts because it's going over more of a curve or a bulge, which is the buttocks. So the back darts are deeper or go down a little bit deeper than the front darts, and the standard back dart depth, if you will, is going to be like between 5 and 5.5 inches. Now I am going to do 5 because I'm a little bit shorter. So I will measure down along this dashed line till I get to 5, and I'll notate a point. Then I will do the same along this dashed line and mark a point. And then we're going to want to connect these 3 points here. So you're going to connect this point here and here to here, creating like a triangle, like so. Okay, so now we have our 2 back darts drafted. We'll come over to the front and repeat this same steps. So again, L would have been where we had the midpoint of our dart if we were just doing a single dart, but because we are doing a double dart for the front and the back, we are going to use that to as a midpoint for the distance between the two darts on the front. So on the back, we did about 1.5 inches difference between the two darts. On the front, we'll do about 1.25 inches. So you'll do, let's see, the difference between that, 1.25 inches, which is 1.25. We'll divide that in 2, and we get 5/8 of an inch. So we measured over from L. So you'll measure over 5/8 of an inch to the left, and then to the right of L, you'll measure over 5/8 of an inch. So those are the new starting dart legs, one for the one dart and one for the second dart leg. So our front dart intake amount was 1/2 inch. So now what we're going to do is mark from one of the dart legs over to the left. To complete this one, we have 1/2 inch over to mark that second dart leg for the first dart, and then 1/2 inch over to the right on this second dart to mark the second dart leg. Now, again, as we did on the back, we're finding the midpoint for those 2 points, which is going to be 1/4 of an inch. And we're just going to make a little tick there and a little tick there. And we are going to draw our center of our dart guiding line down from line AD to line GH. As I mentioned before, the front dart is shallower than the back dart. And typically it's going to be between 3 and 3.5 inches deep. So I will take my ruler, and along these center guidelines, I'm going to measure, for me, I'm going to do 3.5 inches, I think. So I'll do 3.5. So I'm going to measure down 3.5 inches and mark a point, my dart tip point. I'm going to measure down on this guideline, 3.5 inches, mark my dart tip point, and then I'm going to play connect the dot. So from this dart leg down to the dart point, then from the dart point up to that second dart leg. And again over here, this first dart leg down to the dart tip or the dart point, and from that tip up to that second dart leg. So now we have drafted both the front darts and the back darts. And again, we did 2 on the front and the back. Typically you wouldn't do this unless the difference between your waist and your hip measurements, your waist circumference and your hip circumference measurements, are greater than 10 inches. Mine is less than 10 inches, so I could have got away with just doing 1 dart on the front and the back. Now, it's important to notate that we are drafting 1/2 of the front and 1/2 of the back of a skirt block. Therefore, your front skirt panel will end up having 4 darts, and each side of your back block or your back skirt, the back of your skirt will have 4 darts for a total of 8 darts. Again, this is typical if the difference between your waist and your hip is greater than 10, because it provides a better fit. If it's less than 10, 1 dart will suffice, which would have you having 4 darts all around, 2 in the front and 2 in the back. Okay, so now we are going to draw the side seams for the front and the back. And again, we said that both I and J notate where those side seams are going to go through. And the side seams usually kind of sit higher on the hip. So we're just going to measure up about 3/8 of an inch higher than each of these points, which is going to be 3/8 of an inch higher. So that's going to have me like right here. Let's see. Where am I? 3/8 of an inch higher. So I'm going to mark just a little point above both of those, because when I'm drafting my side seam, I want to kind of extend that up through those 2 points. Now, if you have a hip curve ruler, which again is not mandatory for starting out, but it's always a good tool to have, you will use your hip curve to draft your side seam. We are going to be going up from where lines E and F and G and H intersect. So this point right here, we're going to measure up through that extended point that we just made. So you want to line up your hip curve ruler like so. And then you're going to want to draw that hip curve or that side seam. We're going to do the same for the front. So we're going to line our ruler up with that extended point here. So we remember we measured up 3/8 of an inch from points I and J. So we're going up to that point, down to where lines E and F and G and H intersect. So now we have the side seam of the front, or the back, and the side seam of the front. All right, so to finish off our front and our back skirt blocks, we're going to perfect or finalize the waistlines up here. Now, my darts are very, the dart intake amount for my darts are very small because I am very small. So it's not going to be much of the dart intake shape that you typically would see if you have more of an intake amount on your darts. If I had done one dart, then you would see this more defined triangular outlet shape. But what we're going to do is we're going to extend each dart leg up about 1/8 of an inch, just a little bit for each dart leg. It's very minimal, it looks like, but it'll make a difference when completing the waistline and the dart here. So some of my notches were already kind of like at that 1/8 mark. And then for the center of your dart, we're gonna go up about 1/4 of an inch. So we're just gonna draw lines about 1/4 of an inch up from line AD on your darts at that center guideline, or that center or midway point. All right, and then we're just going to connect to create this little dart outlet. I don't know if outlet is the right term, but it's not an inlet, so it goes outward. It's a little triangular. Can't talk today. So we'll make that little triangular pop out. And now we just want to true our waistline. Now, one of the tools that I didn't mention that is useful to have is a French curve. It looks like this. I lost mine at the art center where I teach pattern making. And I just need to order another one or run by there and see if I can find it. French curves looks like this. I just printed this and laminated it and cut it out for use today. We are going to be starting on the back using this French curve. It's just a slight little curve. I'm going to be going from this elevated point of I into this elevated point on this dart leg. So it's gonna look like another way that you can do your darts is by folding your darts closed. And then this is pretty much going to be like a straight line from this elevated point to this elevated point here. Poking holes in my paper. And then from this elevated point down to point D, it's going to be very, very subtle. It's a very subtle curve, if you will. It's gonna just kind of like blend right into, it's not even gonna, it's gonna be very minimal. So that's essentially your waistline. Now that's not the perfect, I wouldn't consider that the perfect way to do it. I would actually fold your darts, which I will show in a minute here, to true the waistline. But because my darts are so small, it works for them. So let me do it on the front just as I did on the back. So we're doing that, connecting these, and then from there down. Oof. It's very, very subtle in the front, but right into that waistline. So now we have drafted the front and the back, or half of the front and half of the back blocks for your basic skirt with a double dart design. I will show you what that all looks like cut out in just a minute. Before I cut them out, I want to show you how you would do it if you just folded the darts closed and used a tracing wheel to create this little shape. Okay, so to show you the technique of folding the darts, I'm going to fold the darts so that the dart for the back, I'm going to fold towards the center. You can fold towards the side seam as well. But I'm going to fold so that I close the darts, so bringing one dart foot to meet the other along the waistline. And here it looks like my midline is a little bit off, so I want to make sure that that's more so matching up like so. And then I would take my tracing wheel and just right where the darts are, the dart legs are, kind of use that tracing wheel. And when I open it up, it's hard to see, but it will create a little perforated line. So for me, it's more like not as deep as I had originally had it, which again, I kind of knew because my dart intake amount is not a lot. So it's very shallow. And I would do the same on here, and then I would cut out and cut out. All right, so there you have it. You have your front skirt block and you have your back skirt block. Now, typically when you are making a skirt, for those who are familiar with sewing, your skirt is usually going to be one full panel. So you can either draft a full panel of the skirt front, or you can just notate on your sloper or on your block that you're going to want to cut on fold. And that's what you would put on a pattern or anything like that if you're gonna line that up with a folded part of your fabric and cut to get the full panel. Back of skirts, where you usually put zippers and such and so on, might be in 2 panels. But there you have it.